Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the ABT Time podcast for episode 32 here in the new year. It's our second episode of the new year. We've got a very special guest today, Dr. Nancy Knowlton, who's part of our ABT framework course. And we've also got my co-host coming back to rejoin us. I'll introduce her in a moment. But first thing I wanted to mention is, in case you don't know, we now have 4 versions of the ABT framework, the Narrative Gym book out. This week, we've released the politics version. They're all available now in paperback. And this was the original recipe, the Narrative Gym, a little over a year ago. This is the Narrative Gym for Business with Park Howell, released last September. This is the Narrative Gym for Law with Doug Passon, defense lawyer and longtime instructor teaching storytelling for lawyers, and has been using the ABT for 3 or 4 years. He's been written up in the New York Times a couple of times. And then this is the new one, the Narrative Gym for Politics with Dave Gold, veteran political strategist, just came out. So all different varieties. And on that note, how's about we bring on my wonderful co-host for ABT Time podcast, Dr. Jen Martin, coming to us from Melbourne, Australia. And how's it going down there in the summertime?
Good morning, Randy. Well, I haven't got a cup of tea because it's too hot for me to drink tea. I have a lovely, refreshing, cool glass of water instead because, we sort of had a fairly cool, wet beginning to our summer, which was predicted from La Nina. But then the last few weeks, it's been really rather warm. So it's kind of Melbourne in summer, what you would expect. But there's no fires, which is excellent.
Yeah. Touching
wood. I hope it stays this way.
Exactly. We did that. Remember that special episode we did early on about fire down under, above and down under. Are they continuing to address preparation for fire there? Is it continue to be an issue of discussion, or is it so preempted by COVID and everything else like that you're likely to get blindsided by another fire season?
Oh, no, I think, fire is such a critical and ongoing part of the Australian landscape that there are always people prepared to jump into action any moment. And when I say no fires, I just mean no really big fires that have made international news. Of course, there's always little fires. That's inevitable in summer. But no, I think people are always ready. But of course, if you're isolating because of COVID and your family is isolating from COVID, and maybe you haven't done the day-to-day preparation as much as you might have in another year, but I don't think anyone's forgotten about fire, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I asked that because where I live here in Southern California, there's big, horrible fires 3 years ago and lots of response to that. But then you could feel it just kind of trickles away and other things come up, and it just isn't the persistent. It's just hard to continue to prepare for disasters when they're not knocking on the door all the time. But that's what happens. So, okay. Indeed. We've got a wonderful guest today. How about you go ahead and join us there, Dr. Nancy Knowlton. Yay.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
Lovely to see you.
Nice to be
And
here.
Nancy is one of the central characters in the ABT framework course for the past 2 years, played a major role, is the only person to get consistently a quote standing ovation at the end of her presentation each time. She's usually the 9th or the 10th round of the course, and a whole bunch of people hit their little standing ovation thing on their in their chat window on Zoom. And so that's the next best thing to having a live audience. We got a bunch of things there's going to be a central theme to this whole discussion, which of course is what your whole life has turned into, which is optimism. You are you got the rose colored glasses, I guess. Maybe that's what you will go down in history as.
You can call me the Queen of Optimism, though.
Queen of Optimism, exactly. Sure.
It's better than one of my colleagues who's the Queen of the Dead Zones.
Precisely. All right, let's see. I'm going to try and start off with a little jumping back in time. And the first time I don't know if I met you, but my first year of graduate school, I think, first or second year, you came and gave a talk in Lewontin's lab on the work you were doing with anemones and snapping shrimp, I believe. Was that your dissertation work that you did, or postdoctoral?
That was my dissertation. I studied the monogamy in shrimp. It turns out they're only serially monogamous. So.
My PhD was about monogamy too, just in a completely different species.
And what was that? What was that species?
A species of possum called a mountain brush-tailed possum, or a bobuck.
So were they really monogamous or just serially monogamous?
Well, I studied two adjacent populations in quite different habitats with different resource availability. And one population was really quite strictly monogamous, not 100% every individual, but long-term pair bonds, lifetime pair bonds. But a neighbouring population was completely polygynous because they had more resources. So males could have much, much smaller home ranges and come into contact with lots more females. So very variable mating system. It was super interesting.
Which group was happier?
Well, Randy, that would be hard to answer.
You never surveyed them about that, did you?
I tried.
That's wonderful. And let's see, Nancy, where were the anemones and snapping shrimp in the Caribbean you worked on?
Yeah, I studied them on the north coast of Jamaica and Discovery Bay. I think where I met you, right? Isn't that
yeah. Eventually in the summer of '80, but by then weren't you working on corals?
Well, I was, because in the summer. Well, early in the summer I was still working on snapping shrimp, but then 1980 was the summer of Hurricane Allen.
Yeah, and
that was when this huge hurricane still has holds some records for strongest duration of high winds. Swept by the north coast and took basically turned the reefs of Discovery Bay into a parking lot. That's what it looked like. And so I pretty much dropped everything with a bunch of other people, and we ran around tagging all the survivors, hoping to watch them recover. And this is not really a great intro to optimism, but they were.
It was devastation that made you an optimist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it only took me a couple of decades.
Did the hurricane wipe out all the anemones you've been studying?
No, the anemones were fine. The shrimp look a little worse for the wear. Some of them were wandering around without claws and stuff. I think there was a certain amount of social disruption caused by the hurricane.
Yeah. Because I mean, I was there too, and I was one of the first people that went out and dived like 2 days after the hurricane, because the first day was just all muddy water out there. You couldn't see anything. And I remember so vividly, everything down to 30 feet was wiped out, and then 30 to 60 feet, you saw piles of debris everywhere. What depth were your anemones that you were studying?
Oh, they're really shallow. They were about 10 feet, but they were also inside the bay. So I mean, we definitely saw muddy water, but by definition, they were protected a bit by the reefs themselves. So it was very, those of you who are divers out there, it was very surgy. I'm sure those poor little shrimp were having, like that for a while. But
that was a crazy experience. Remember, we battened down the whole lab there on the North Coast. Well, it actually started probably 3 days ahead of that. You may recall, my good buddy Mark Patterson was my roommate there, and he had brought down his ham radio, and we were picking up on the ham radio the reports when the Hurricane Allen started to cross the Lesser Antilles way down near Venezuela, and they were already saying this is going to be one of the biggest hurricanes of the century. And then we tracked it for like 3 days and tried to start warning everybody, and then everybody began to realize what was coming. And then we spent that one day battening down the whole lab and clearing everything out, and then we moved up to somebody's big house up in the Blue Mountains. That was your house up there in the Blue Mountains. We all slept on the floor that night. Yeah. And I remember coming out at sunrise and looking down there and seeing those enormous waves crashing on this reef that normally only had like 2-foot waves on it.
Yeah, I mean, the trees were from way up there. They looked like little matchsticks, and the waves were the size of the matchsticks. And it's not only just the height, but there were just a few of them. So the bay was like a kilometer or two across, and there were only 1 or 2 waves. And normally waves are much more packed together, and those widest spaced waves are the ones that really reach down deep. So nobody, at least I knew, had ever seen anything like them.
Yeah, it was amazing devastation. And we changed the whole ecosystem there basically. And what's it like today? What's the most recent time you've been diving there at Discovery Bay?
A really long time ago. I don't think I've been back since about 1987.
Oh wow! Because
Jeremy's been back. I think there were a lot of things that was the sort of the beginning of the I'm not going to say the end, but it was the beginning of the next phase. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And
the shift.
because there was a hurricane, then there was the disease of the corals and the disease of the sea urchins. And so by I first went down there in 1974. By mid 80s, it was essentially just seaweeds. And I think it's gotten a little better since then. I think there's a little marine protected area nearby and whatever. It still, I'm sure, has a long way to go, like almost all the reefs in the Caribbean, because the sea urchins really haven't come back.
Well,
I can't speak in detail to what's going on in Discovery Bay because I haven't been.
Sure,
but somebody writes in and says, "You're wrong. Discovery Bay looks beautiful."
Well, the good news is nobody writes into us on anything, so you're off the hook on this. And this is our own fun podcast for which the major theme is ABT type dynamics, what we're going to get into. But just one last simple question there about Discovery Bay and Caribbean coral reefs in general. If you were to set the baseline at 100% healthy, pristine, whatever, 500 years ago, where would you have put it at the broadest and simplest qualitative overall assessment? Where'd you would have put it probably in the 1960s? Where'd you put it by the 80s? And where would you put it in the 90s and then today? What do you think? What's the quality like compared to pristine?
Well, you skipped the one decade. That's actually there at the beginning.
The 70s, yeah.
70s. Let's try.
Yeah. Well, let's go 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Sort of similar.
Okay. 60s.
So the 70s, you'd have to give it. You can't. One of the things we learned is that there are two pieces to a healthy reef. One is the corals, and they were gorgeous in the 70s. Before the hurricane, they were spectacular.
I remember.
I mean, coral as far as you could see. And back in those days when there wasn't much seaweed, as far as you could see was really far. I mean, almost like the reefs went on forever.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, and I often show this picture in my, when I give a talk, I took a picture of the staghorn coral beds and, back in 1974 as a grad student, was one of the first pictures I ever took. And you can see the corals are fine, but what's really interesting and what it's not something that I really thought about when I was taking the picture. There are almost no fish in that picture. So, so the grade for the corals was probably A-, not knowing. I mean, it probably was pretty good, but the grade for the fish was already like a D. And that turned out you can't separate those grades because the D grade for the fish was what made the coral still go down the drain afterwards.
Gotcha. But then Hurricane Allen hit and, big impact there and ecosystem shift, at least for Discovery Bay. I went there in 92 was the last time. I took some graduate students from University of New Hampshire and they were all thrilled to see coral reefs. And I was sitting there, depression man, saying, don't be happy, quit celebrating. I don't care if this is your first coral reefs. These things look dead compared to what I remember. And so I was grumpy old man. That was my first introduction to shifting baselines. Is I was looking at a different baseline than they were. This is their first time seeing coral reefs, but they were dead and there was tons of algae there and just nothing similar to what it was. And the first summer I was there was 78 when it was exactly as they said, still the super healthy, incredible reefs. And so then since the 90s or so, and the Caribbean in general, I mean, you haven't been back to Discovery Bay, but you've been lots of places in the Caribbean. Is it on a plateau of mediocrity? Is it continuing to decline?
Well, what's interesting is that actually, sort of like you can't separate the corals and the fish. On the other hand, you can't lump together someplace like Curacao with someplace like Jamaica.
No, I know, but I'm asking you.
Reefs a lot of reefs are terrible, but there are a handful of reefs where they've controlled fishing and they places like
Bonaire,
right? That control fishing. They don't have fish traps. They don't.
Yeah. Okay, but you're getting into all the specifics. I'm asking you at the biggest, broadest brush level.
Oh, for the whole Caribbean?
Yeah.
If you want me to grade the whole Caribbean, it's still pretty bad.
Is it continuing to decline? Is the question.
It's hard to know when. There are places that are actually increasing. I have but as I say, can only, it's hard to.
Clearly,
the whole
your scientist mind.
But some places are showing promise.
Your scientist mind.
You want to talk about optimism, you have to find the places they're showing promise. Sorry, no general grades allowed.
Your scientist mind is fighting me and looking for this.
No, it's not my scientist mind, it's my optimism mind. That's the whole problem with, it's impossible to be optimistic if you take try to grade the planet. You have to look at things case by case. So that's not my science. I mean, it is my science mind, but that isn't actually what drives that's not why I'm fighting back.
Yeah. But it's just, I've found it frustrating, the whole coral reefs issue on the global scale or whatever. There just is no singular voice on what's the status of coral reefs. And when we were running our Shifting Baselines campaign, I said this over and over again. Okay, what is the overall status? Is it going downhill, uphill, whatever? And well, it's here, it's there, it's this. And this gets into narrative. You can't educate the public on where we're going if it's constantly, well, some places are good, some places are bad. Which leads me into actually the one little example I want to present to you as a focal point for us discussing about this optimism thing. So with Shifting Baselines, at the very beginning, we did this flash slideshow with the folks at Tree Media Group in Santa Monica. Did a really nice job on the production of it. This is back when flash slideshows were a new thing on the internet. And they really did a great design job with it. It was a 4-minute piece, and it was about shifting baselines. It's titled Pristine. You can still see it on the Shifting Baselines website. And it was very popular. People use it in a lot of places. But as we were working on the early draft of it, it was all doom and gloom. It was about the world fisheries are declining. And we had the little vignette in there about today's kids, by the time they can drive a car, there's going to be no fishery left in the North Atlantic. And all these predictions of all these fisheries that were declining, being lost. And when we got a completed draft of it together, I began sending it to friends and gathering feedback, both from environmentalist friends that work on these issues and knucklehead friends of mine from Kansas and over the years that have absolutely nothing to do with, and especially filmmaker friends of mine from USC Film School with no background in environmentalism, no interest in the issue, just asking them to watch and give me feedback. And what happened was that this whole thing was all bad news. And at the end, then we added one little anecdote at the end, which was, but today in the Florida Keys, they have put in preserves that are protecting these grouper. And this species of grouper today has already now shown increase in size. It's bouncing back.
That's true.
Okay. All right. So what happened with that? And you're not going to like this, but
no, I'm going to hate it. I can just tell.
Exactly. Was that I got a very clear pattern that came back. Two completely different demographics. This is like our inner circle, outer circle diagram from the course, which was the inner circle, the environmentalists who are so beaten down, depressed, and always looking for hope and optimism, all that sort of stuff. They loved that vignette at the end. And for them, that was tremendous. Yes, showing we can do it. But the outside, the outer circle, the people that didn't have any background, any connection with the issue, over and over again, they said, you had us right up until that thing at the end, right up until you told us that little anecdote. We were so worked up. Oh my God, we're losing this resource. We got to get in there. I want to donate money right now. Tell me where I can send some money to join the cause. And then at the end, you suddenly say, oh, but we're already making progress and good people are on the job doing this. And these people said, I'm so busy and spread out with what I do that I thought, oh, good. Okay. They've got it under control. They don't need me to get involved. So yay. Thank you for that good news at the end. And I know you guys, if you keep working on it, you're going to fix the problem. That's the psychology of the two different directions. And it really begs this question about what is more motivating, the hope versus the fear. And that grades right into Hollywood. That is the essence of screenwriting. There's two fundamental emotions that you're dealing with all screenplays. We hope that the hero does this, but we fear this is going to happen to the hero. And I've never had a clear answer on what to do about that. And I'm not sure that you do either. You know that these things work both. I really think it's more about the yin and the yang. It's about Zen. It's about, you've got to have both things. You can't just go one dimensional and say everything's good or everything's bad.
I agree completely.
Okay. So now you take it from there. You know what I'm talking about with that syndrome, which is really frustrating because you want to have that thing in there of the hope thing, but then you hear from these people that literally use that as an excuse to disconnect. Well, okay, you guys got it under control.
I mean, they're actually, to be fair to the environmentalists, there's some of I once got an email, I was copied on an email that said something that I'm sure I was deliberately copied on this email that said something to the effect of ecologists who participate in optimism events should be ashamed of themselves. So
that's a bit harsh.
You optimist, you.
Yeah. So, I think even people who are working in the field of conservation, there's some people who are, feel that any indication that things might turn around, exactly what you said, either one, it lets people, the sort of the general public, off the hook. It's fine, we don't have to worry about it. Or even more perversely, allows the dark side to take that information and undermine any, try to undermine any efforts that are being made. So that is a line that I have to say I constantly think about, worry about, struggle with, just the way you do, because I don't think there is any single answer. What I will say though is, when was that video that you made?
2003.
Okay, so that's a long time ago. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. I must
like
be
almost
getting
20
old.
years ago.
And tell me about it. God. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, this November will make 20 years since I wrote that editorial in the LA Times.
Yeah, so it's important to remember that people who've lived through 20 years of doom and gloom aren't necessarily the same people that you got the feedback from. So it's the whole context of where people are is very different. Now, I'm not saying that, you still can't be a Pollyanna. I always begin my talks and I end one saying, look, these are huge problems, they're big, this is not easy, it's not fun. But there's the but, Randy. And there are things we can do. And therefore we need to do them. Okay. That's the ABT. Now, that's a different ABT than the ABT 20, 30 years ago, which was reefs are beautiful, but we really did a bad job taking care of them. And now they're all lost, and it's a tragedy and but without a solution. So it's, narratives, the structure of the narrative may stay the same, but the actual narrative itself can change over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think that's happening.
Yeah, because Randy, I'd be surprised if you repeated that experiment now and you took out the last little optimism bit. I would imagine, and I'm happy for you to argue with me if you disagree, but I would imagine you would have people who would watch it and might somewhat feel fired up about it and think, this is all terrible, we need to do something. But I've got no evidence that you would know what to do, even if I gave you my money. So there's no point.
Yes.
I would think that there would be people who would say, you've got to give me some indication that you know how to tackle this problem. And I'm not going to support you unless you can show me that you think you know what to do, in which case the little optimism piece at the end would be crucial to get those people over the line to be willing to give you their money. I don't know. Do you disagree?
Well, I'm going to disagree with something that Nancy sent me, this editorial she wrote. She had 2 editorials in Science published recently. And
that was right on the Earth Optimism Summit 2017, Science and Nature.
Okay, well, that's relatively recently. Okay, and on one of them, there's this kind of pull quote here in big text, an excerpt from the article, and it says, as a community, we seem to be addicted to despair. All right, before I weigh in on that, what are your thoughts on that line?
Do I still agree with what I wrote?
Yes. I'm going to give you one last chance to change it.
I think much less, even now. So I was just talking about how things are different between 2003 and now. They're also different between 2017 and now. And I think now there's been a huge, I'm not going to attribute it to, single-handed efforts on my part, but all sorts of different people have been talking about the importance of a focus on solutions for the last 5 years. And the result is that I don't think environmentalists are as addicted to despair as they were back even in 2017, which is, when you think about it, not that long ago. So things change. Things can change quickly in terms of the sort of.
All right, I'm going to argue with you about that line. Sure. Because what we're addicted to is contradiction.
Oh, well, yes.
So we're getting into ABT stuff. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You can't be addicted to more than one thing at a time, Randy.
Well, we're getting into ABT stuff, and in fact, about 5 years ago, I think we did a visit to University of Idaho, and we did a panel discussion with 2 neurophysiologists there. And one of the guys, as I talked about the ABT, he said, I listen to your ABT thing, and I see it as just the same old thing. which is just dopamine addiction. And he said, a lot of us neurophysiologists, we think that humans are nothing more than just dopamine addicts, and everything that they do day in and day out is just to get these little squirts of dopamine in their brain. Anything that will give them that, they'll do it. And the word "but" produces a micro squirt of dopamine in the brain. The contradiction, that's what draws people in. And that's exactly the premise of the whole ABT framework, is that's the moment. That's where you see the brain activity. The neurophysiologists can show you that with the functional MRI. You're telling somebody a story, and it's on the moment of contradiction that the narrative part of the brain activates, boom, goes up. And we see this in this problem within the science world, which is the last guest we had last week, David H. Friedman. What he talked about is basically the plague of false positives that's well documented at this point. It's a giant flaw in the world of science. Science has got this giant source of noise in there that is narrative, which is that editors can't help themselves. They select for things that are a positive result, that have got a headline to it, and they have a bias against null results. So we know that the brain's already screwed up in that direction of selecting for these positive patterns, at the extent where what David talked about last week was Dr. John Ioannidis, who in 2005 made this pronouncement that the majority of biomedical results published today are false positives. And the medical community rose up and then repeated his work and said, oh my God, he's right. There's just been this giant selection towards noise of all of these patterns where you can't, get things corrected with null results because they just won't publish that sort of stuff. And so I see that as similar in terms of, it's not so much environmentalists are addicted to despair. They're addicted to the stories. There's no story there if the environment's healthy and normal and natural. There's a story every time something has gone off in the wrong direction. And that's what you go around looking for, those patterns. And you can, I guess, equate that to despair. Now, what you're extrapolating that into is that the idea of that obsession with seeing the places of destruction translates eventually into emotional consequences of feeling despair over that. Take it from there. What have I said that's wrong? Everything. Exactly.
Well, I don't really disagree with you. I think that, I have no idea. I would never say in a public facing format that most coral reef ecology or most marine ecology is wrong. I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to. But there are some examples. I'll give you one really good example, which is it appears now that all these studies that appeared to show that coral reef fish, when exposed to ocean acidification, lose their sense of smell and swim towards predators and get totally confused and don't know what they're doing. And there's a lot of there've been a lot of discussion about whether that whole body of work is basically false.
False positive.
That's a perfect example of what you're talking about.
All right, hang on. I know nothing about what you just said. So let's slow that down a little bit. Tell us more detail. That's fascinating. That's exactly what I just said. You're right. It's that plague of false positives. So tell us a bit more, if you can, about that. Do you have more to say on that?
Well, I don't have a lot more to say on it. I just know that it was very splashy news. The idea that
it's a cool story.
Poor old Nemo had lost his sense of smell and couldn't would swim right into the mouth of a giant predatory grouper rather than hiding in its sea anemone. That wasn't exactly the result, but it had a lot of, when I say addicted to despair, maybe the better way of saying it is addicted to catastrophe.
Yeah.
So like a catastrophe movie. It's sort of like Don't Look Up, like that sort
of. I'm addicted to studies that debunk false positives. I love when somebody comes along with a good critical mind. One of my favorite things in recent years was Dr. Paul Zak, the hug doctor, the guy who had this tiny little paper in Nature years ago, in which he was one of 3 authors on it, about how, I think it was like rats rubbing up against each other, you could detect an elevated level of serotonin in their brain or something like that. And he translated that and extrapolated that into, this is what happens with humans when they hug each other. They release oxytocin or whatever it is. And then eventually Ed Young with the Atlantic in particular wrote a great article in which he just took the guy's work to pieces and said, you can't extrapolate from rats into humans. And I know it gets you a TED Talk and all this popularity, you get on everybody's talk show as a result of it. And then he wrote that article in the Atlantic, and then John Oliver on his HBO show did a 20-minute segment about Paul Zak and the idiocy of the hug doctor in his TED talk, where he goes around, hugs people in the audience and said, I just released oxytocin in your brain. And that's the false positive thing. That's what's generated all the neuroskeptics, that are just get so tired of all these popularizers taking one little tidbit of info that makes for a good story, which circles back to what you're saying there, is that makes for a good story. Ocean acidification has resulted in Nemo being lost. And then thank goodness for the people with the critical minds who do come along and hold the feet to the fire for that sort of stuff and show that it's this bias towards great storytelling that has corrupted so much of the scientific literature. Every time you come up with one of those great stories, people can't help themselves. Oh my God, that's awesome. I mean, just like Jen was just saying there, that's cool. Nemo's find his way home. Yeah, what a good story.
Who wouldn't want to tell that story and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That really fits with what I think is going on out there in the world. We're screwing it all up.
And to be honest, I don't even really know where this controversy stands right now. Maybe the Nemo smellless group has fought back. But
that's just one of many like that.
But it's an example. That said, Randy, you're not going to try to argue with me and say, the idea that Caribbean coral reefs are in bad shape is all false positive. You just have to go out and swim on a Caribbean
coral
reef.
Oh, no.
So there's certain patterns that I guess I would say are robust enough to sort of, you don't have to worry about things like that. But anything that's, I think that's partially the way, anything that particularly is kind of unexpected, that certainly was an unexpected finding. People knew that corals would be affected by ocean acidification because their skeletons are made of something that dissolves in acid. So, but I don't think anyone was expecting to think that fish sensory biology was going to be messed up with ocean acidification. Any finding like that is just really puzzling. That's all part of science. It's called replication. And it's hard to get replication funded for the reasons that you're outlining. I think it's very good
exactly.
Point.
Yeah, I think that's
but I do think it may be slower than you want, but it is to some extent, science is to some extent a self-correcting enterprise.
Yeah. That is the concern, because it's sprinting along so rapidly in a world of expanding information.
It works that way partly because there are all these young people that are wanting to topple their elders. So in some sense, there's a kind of a social structure that at least helps fight again. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it does.
This is maybe my idealism at work, because just some of these things, when you see, there was a thing 10 years ago that I just left me in disbelief. Nature published a paper that was about the 40% worldwide decline in phytoplankton standing stock. And Nature had this paper. And I used to teach biological oceanography. When I saw it, I could not believe, really? The standing crop of phytoplankton since the 1950s has declined by 40%. And it took them 6 months in this self-correcting mechanism. And 6 months later, they then published a whole series of letters from all of these other biological oceanographers, all saying, what in the world are you talking about here? And one group even said it may have actually increased in the North Atlantic. And it was absolute garbage noise. And it'd be one thing if their headline had been a 4% increase, but 40%, the enormity of that. And I remember I was at this Aspen Environment Forum in 2012, and this one guy in the Q&A got up and went on a whole thing. And, and furthermore, we've ruined the oceans. We've declined the phytoplankton by 40%. And then I interrupted the guy. I said, that's wrong. Did you read the retraction letters? He hadn't. None of them had. I heard 3 different times people bringing that factoid up from Nature. Nobody gets to the retraction things that go on 6 months later. And then that guy came up to me in the hallway at lunch and started shouting at me, calling me an environmental skeptic. And I said, I'm not a skeptic. I read the literature. So that's the insanity. It's that noise level getting out there. And so as a former scientist, I would like to believe that the critical mechanisms of the scientific literature would err in the direction of conservativeness, not publishing crazy headlines as opposed to letting the headlines go wild like that. But clearly that's gone on a lot. And so again, that's a fascinating, I'm going to read up on that thing about Nemo getting lost.
It was actually something about it in the news just recently. So it's definitely being debated.
It's a problem, but it weaves right into everything we're working on with the ABT framework, which is this idea of the information maelstrom, that we're hitting a point where information and disinformation are getting to be equal and opposite forces. And what's going on with the pandemic, in the past 2 years is just an utter complete nightmare. In the last month or so, I'm giving a talk next Friday to the folks at the Scripps Research Institute and the Salk Institute on this stuff. And I'll be talking about what's going on with CDC. I mean, this is just really sad and depressing that they have completely botched the communications job there. It's all through the New York Times, the Washington Post. It's really well documented at this point. And then I've been talking with my sources there who tell me about the current director, Rochelle Walensky, still lives in Boston, has a condo in DC, and shows up about one day every 2 weeks in Atlanta at the CDC for one rush day. How can you run an entire institute of 10,000 employees not even living there? And the stuff, you know, it's just all out of control. And the result is all this failed communication and bad messaging everywhere. So the question is whether we're getting to a point of a society where the noise levels are so out of control. How do you find the signals in the middle of them all? And I think that one of the pieces of advice in the middle of that is to at least try and pull back the literature and be a little more conservative and not allow these crazy headlines to come out like that. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of issues about science communication with the pandemic. Part of it is a clear narrative, but also part of it is the narrative keeps changing for reasons that aren't really the CDC's fault, because we keep learning new things about the virus. So it's kind of a perfect storm of
well, what's a shame
not doing it well to begin with, and having a pretty challenging communication situation regardless. And plus, I mean, the other thing that's happening is that, you know, in terms of the way people listen, people are only now listening to news that they agree with. So, you know, there's this whole confirmation bias, as it's,
of course,
you know, that people call it. And that also adds to the problem. So
of course, but there's an utter
it's a huge mess.
That's certainly
so
true.
Levels.
But there's from the start been an utter and complete lack of singular narrative of one voice kind of explaining this stuff to the public. And one of the things that's really a shame is that a very conscious effort was made in the first few months of the pandemic to open the floodgates on the literature and go ahead and publish a lot of stuff that probably is going to be wrong. Better to get everything out there and have this noise factor cranked up than to continue with the slow peer review that would take 6 months to a year, because I think it was really cool that they understood time was of the essence there in developing the vaccine. They had to get it all out, and they knew, you know, they made a strategic choice. The thing that's a shame is that can't be explained to the public and things like that, you know, part of the price we're going to pay in getting this vaccine out really quickly is going to be a lot of noise. So everybody get braced for, we're going to be, you know, making some mid-course corrections and things like that. But there's been no explanation at all to the public from any clear voice. And sadly, it hasn't been Fauci. You know, that's the one guy who could have put together a weekly show or something where he really explained to people, this is how it works. But he hasn't. He's just, you know, run, gun, made it up as he's gone along. So there's been no one person in charge. And that gets back to the singular narrative. If you don't have the one voice kind of laying it out, that's an endless problem with the science world. You know, it's all driven by committees that are all competing against each other, and lack of clarity in the end. What for the coral reef community, is there a singular voice with the ICRS? Is that
yeah, I mean, I actually I was the lead author on something that was supposed to be it was a singular voice on the state of coral reefs and what the future. So I think the ICRS for the coral reef community operated that way pretty well.
Yeah, at least has that potential. Yeah, it's important to have that.
But there's the singular voice in the sense of the message, and then there's also the messenger as well, and who is really, you know, who is effective at taking that clear message. And because you can have a completely clear message, but if you don't have if you don't have a clear delivery in terms of the way it's put together, and also just the way the person comes across, something you wrote about in your very earliest book about, you know, trying to be likable, you know, there's just a lot of different elements that make for communication success. But it's the whole thing. You know, actually, to me, the thing that's crazy is now we've gotten to a situation is that people are willing to die for believing in that information. I thought, man, I've given up all hope on, you know, trying to that segment of the population, if they're not convinced that they need a vaccine and a booster to make it through the pandemic, then we're not going to reach them on climate change either, I'm afraid.
One of my best and favorite friends and I, for the last 6 months, have slowly been accumulating a table of contents for a book that, if we were to ever publish it, would be titled "Dying Stupid." And it's every one of those stories of people on their deathbed finally asking for the vaccine, and the nurse having to say, "No, it's too late. You're dead. It's too late." Yeah, that was 6 weeks ago. It might have helped you.
And actually, some of them, to their dying breath, saying, "It's not. I don't have COVID."
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I'm dying of something that's not COVID, because COVID's not real, even though I'm in a COVID ward.
Yeah, yep. It's utterly mind-numbing. So let's just, with a broad brush, hit the 3 or 4 milestones of the history of optimism for you. There was the symposium you and Jeremy put together, Beyond the Obituaries, that was kind of like the first little seed, I think. Then you scaled it up to the 2017 event that I was at, which was the Earth Optimism Summit. So you took it from ocean optimism, broadened it to Earth optimism. And that was a massive undertaking, which clearly was very successful. And then that gave rise to the second iteration of that. Was it 2020? They did the second version of the Earth Optimism. It had to be online because of the pandemic. So that's sort of 3 major milestones along the way. Is there anything major I'm missing there? And is there a next milestone on that trajectory of promoting optimism in the environmental community?
Well, but I guess, there's sort of the genesis story of the Beyond the Obituaries Symposia, and how this realization that we were, teaching students, it was medical school for the ocean, and all we were teaching them was to write obituaries. So that's how, that's kind of, you often ask me what the singular moment in one's career is. To me, that singular moment was this kind of, oh, shoot. Just telling students how bad the ocean is not going to take them all the way.
Sure that singular moment wasn't at dinner in La Jolla with Jeremy and me, where you turned to the two of us and said, "I'm sick of your doom and glooming."
I think that was why that's kind of, it wasn't like a singular moment, singular once, but it was like a growing sort of, it was more like how they say tsunamis are not really big waves, they're actually all these things that come and sort of eventually swamp. That might be my better description of the way I felt. It's sort of like this kind of, but it started with this sort of this image of looking out at students. That film you made about barnacle sex, and you have that guys.
It all comes back to that.
You just show that one on one of your ABT podcasts, but anyway, that's sort of the students sort of kind of almost collapsing in there. This sense of the students kind of collapsing in their chairs, thinking to themselves, "Oh my God, why did I choose this career? It's so depressing. I don't want to be here." Yeah. And that's and then working so hard to get this symposium started, and then having people say, "Oh, you can't do a whole day on success stories in the ocean. There aren't that many." But then in the end, having, so many that people had to be yanked off the stage with a hook, so to speak, after 6 minutes. And it was like, and so there's this incredible birthing story, I think, that goes with the.
Has anybody written that story up in a magazine article? Somebody needs to write that. So it's the pieces are now coming together for a very clear arc, a journey there. And it began with, it's interesting. It began with a gut instinct from you. It didn't begin with a whole bunch of analytical stuff. You at the gut level, like
gut, social scientists have actually known for decades. A little embarrassing, but still.
No, but you got that gut instinct. And this is one of the things that I say a lot, is that mass movements don't begin with a 18-point plan. They begin with a gut instinct of everybody just agreeing on, we're sick of something. It's time to change something. And then it takes time to articulate exactly what they mean by that, how you go about doing it. And I think you had exactly that progression, which was you began with that gut feeling like enough already. And that's why I say, I remember at one dinner in La Jolla that you got sick of listening to Jeremy and me bellyache about our shifting baseline stuff. And then I think you began to articulate, you moved it from the gut level up to the cerebral and began to think, all right, here's the problem. Here's how we can put together an agenda, actually make a difference on it, blah, 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 doing all that sort of stuff. But then to get back to what I was saying, so the most recent milestone was 2020 with that version. Is there something next? Is there going to be a next iteration of Earth Optimism?
Well, Earth Optimism is kind of what I would say is in a stage of, like when an amoeba sort of divides up into little pieces and starts growing and spreading. That was always actually the hope. Wasn't that it would get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in one place. It would be that it wouldn't be more like a virus, so to speak, but a good virus and infect people. And
a good virus.
A good virus. A happy virus. So for me now, I'm working on a book. Yeah. And I think about ABT every single day when I sit down in front of the computer and I look at the paragraph. So thank you, Randy. And I am still, I think, what I'm struggling with now, the biggest thing is how, the stories about bad news are always big stories. Like, even if it's wrong, all the plankton are disappearing or all the reefs are dying, and then the good news stories are this little group of people and, in Bonaire have set up a marine protected area and the corals are slowly going back. So there's no fairness to this fight. So the natural instinct is to throw more and more and more and more positive stories at people. But which is part of what the Earth Optimism Summits were about. And they did work in the sense that you got everyone in a couple of rooms for a weekend, and they walked out kind of shell shocked thinking, oh my God, I had no idea there was so much success out there. Yeah. But then what's the next stage? How do you get people to act on that realization without being again swamped by the real is, the bigness of the bad news, and simply just throwing more and more stories at people, I don't think is the way to go.
Nancy, when you say you want them to act, what is your goal? What would be your ideal action for somebody to respond, having heard all of those good news stories?
Well, it's not, of course, a single recipe for everybody, but it's basically, what do you care about? What are you good at? Combine them and make a difference. For artists, it might be completely different than it is for, community organizer or a scientist. So, but sort of infusing people with that whole notion of keeping your eye on the prize and say, okay, the prize is a planet that works. Yes, all this bad stuff is happening. More bad stuff's going to happen. Some of the stuff that was good is going to turn bad. It's just like, but just keep that kind of single-minded focus on where you're headed. And
towards that very end, I have a prescription for you, a recommendation, suggestion, everything like that. Yes, exactly. And it comes out of that one of those two editorials you just sent me there from Science. You made the mention in there of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, and in the new Narrative Gym for Politics book, there's two appendices in there. And the first one is about, it's titled Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, is the ABT touchstone. And what I go through in there, and you really, I'm going to push you to read that thing and take it to heart, because it's very, very cool. It's about the two versions of the "I Have a Dream" speech that he gave in the summer of 1963. The first one was in Detroit, and it wasn't very well thought out. He thought he was speaking to a much smaller audience, and then they just had this massive turnout, filled the whole arena that he was speaking in. And as a result, this is my hypothesizing, is I think the narrative part of his brain, he had deep, deep narrative intuition. He'd never read ABT books or anything, but he just had it programmed deep in his mindset. And so he went to work between June and August in rewriting that whole speech. And I've been researching it, and there's several books written about that speech itself, and especially one that tells about the night before they all met at the Willard Hotel, he and all of his groups of advisors, and they talked at great length about the speech. And then he went back to his room and did major rewrites that last night. And then last but not least, when he gave the speech, he got 2/3 of the way through it, and hadn't even mentioned the dream part. And Mahalia Jackson was standing next to him and said, Martin, tell them about the dream. And then he extemporaneously in the last third went into I have a dream. But the more important thing is when you look at the speech, that whole last third, it's all therefore. It's all actions. And, I would recommend that you take a look at both drafts of that speech, read that little thing, I'll send it to you, and think through. There's so much wisdom and deep intuition in that speech in particular, that he knew exactly what he was doing, which was to tell some stories in the beginning, to use ABT in the beginning. And then when you get to the 2/3 mark, no more with the and or the but. It's just pure therefore. Therefore, let freedom ring. Therefore, go do this. Therefore, exactly what Jen was just saying there. That's all this advice, and just so pure in that regard. And I just think there's so much wisdom in that one speech, more than any other speech that I've read in all the few thousands that I've done the last 5 or 6 years analyzing with the ABT structure. And that's why I wrote that appendix there. But I would encourage you to really take that to heart as a piece of guidance for, where to go with the things you're doing, because you're tapping it's interesting. You had it in that editorial you cited, I have a dream. It is optimism, that sort of stuff. And yet you look at the first paragraph and it's got the yin and the yang in there. He's got the negativity of slavery and talking about all that sort of stuff. So it's not like he just kind of all happiness. So yeah, that's fascinating. What have you got a title for the book? Or you don't want to mention it to us? Because whatever it is, we'll say,
I'm not willing to divulge because I don't want to be massacred on screen.
Exactly. I strongly recommend you don't say it.
The title offline for some advice.
No, exactly. That's the worst thing. Whenever you tell people your title, it just didn't grab me.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going there today.
You don't need that piece of discouragement. And have you got a timeline on it? What sort of?
Well, I'm working on it pretty actively now. It takes time because how you talk about the power of narrative is in the specifics.
Yes.
You have, for specifics, you need to find them and you can't make them up. They have to be real specific, at least for me.
Yeah, some people make them up.
I know, but that's not me. I'm not a makeup specific.
Right.
So, so I find out all this amazing stuff, and then I find out too much amazing stuff, and I have to sort of condense it down. And so each paragraph can take a day or so.
Yeah, no, that's.
But and it's covering a lot of ground. It's species, saving species, protecting spaces, climate, and then there's this whole thing about economics and communication and all these incentive structures, and then about the future. So and then not having it turn into an 800-pound book is or 800-page.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you.
So I think I have got to finish it within a year. Let's put it that way. You can hold me to that.
Well, what my little nickname has been for you over the last last 2 decades is the loudest quiet person I know of. And because you're not on a daily basis a loud person that runs around shouting, doing things like that. But I think the things that you've managed to achieve are pretty loud in terms of accomplishments. I mean, culminating with the Earth Optimism, enormous event. And once again, I was asking you, does the Smithsonian have plans to do another round of it, or what's the?
Right now it's hard to know. This summer, actually, the Folklife Festival, which is a big annual event that the Smithsonian runs, but it hasn't actually run for a couple of years because of the pandemic. And then before then, there was a government shutdown right when the planning. So for like 2 or 3 years, they haven't done it. So the theme of the Folklife Festival this summer is Earth Optimism. So I don't think they can think any farther ahead than what
that's
where it is right now.
But that's so cool that you grew it up from that first gut instinct
Absolutely.
into the ocean optimism and then into Earth Optimism. I mean, how much more ambitious of a agenda could you hope for? That's probably about as much as we're going to get through for today. Jen, have you got a final question for Nancy about optimism in general?
Well, I do, but I guess it's a big one that maybe we don't have time for. I guess I've just observed a lot of my friends and colleagues and how they're, I would say to some extent, inherent optimism, the why that gets them out of bed every day to keep doing their jobs has been really shaken during the last 2 years. I just love even brief thoughts on, you know your why, you're going to keep doing your work in the science world, whether it's in ecology or another world, but you're just absolutely bone tired and miserably depressed about seeing how our leaders, our so-called leaders, have responded to this challenge, this, you know, acute challenge that is a pandemic, which shows us that they got nothing when it comes to a chronic challenge like the state of the planet. I don't know, any brief thoughts on the current state of the play?
Right. Yeah. Take it away, Nancy. Come on, inspire us.
I never get out of bed before I read a positive story. Sometimes it takes me longer to get out of bed than and it helps that I'm retired, so I don't have to go anywhere.
That has been kind of your consuming activity in recent years, is scouring, searching for these positive stories, right?
Yeah. And I'll keep going.
Do you have a team working with you on that and collating them, or a website or anything? Or
well, right now it's just me working on the book. And then once I get the book into drafted, you know, into a form that I can really share it with a publicist or, you know, publisher or whatever, then I really want this to go with a website. I don't think a book by itself in this day and age is necessarily the best way of, you have to write the book, but then you have to do more than write the book, I guess would be the way of saying it. So I really want, you know, to turn this into a platform where if somebody wakes up and says, I want to make a difference on this, they can find out the best way to start and tell those stories and have those, you know, as you have often said, the conservation success is a natural, you know, hero's journey kind of structure. And so it's really it lends itself to ABT and you know, a central narrative and a single character, a single point. So
you know, I've got a kind of cute thought for you that you probably don't want to pursue, but actually it's kind of interesting thinking about it. If you put together a list of like the top 10, you know, most powerful, influential environmentalists that are gone now, you know, Rachel Carson and David Brower, and I don't know, on and on, even Jacques Cousteau and all of them. If you pick maybe the 10 most important, did they die as optimists or pessimists?
Now, that's a very good question. And I'm going to put on your list Tom Lovejoy. I don't know if you know who he was.
But he's still around, right?
No, he died on Christmas
He did?
Day. He died on Christmas Day. He was diagnosed with cancer actually not that long ago and knew it was terminal. He apparently died dressed in his characteristic bow tie with his family around him.
Oh my goodness.
But he died an optimist. And he said, even to the very end, if you're not optimistic, what's the point?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, but now can I throw one back at you? Not an environmentalist, but David Halberstam's book, The Powers That Be, is a tremendous, really influential book that I read long ago. And in there, he tells the story of Edward R. Murrow. And he was the great journalist who was one of the radio correspondents in World War II in Europe. And they all came back, he and Eric Severide and Harry Reasoner and a whole bunch of those great journalists, and they began television news. And they began it with the success of how important radio had been in World War II. And television had just begun to develop. And they said, we can use this medium now to educate the masses and really end up with a really smart populace. And through the 50s, they had some success and they grew up CBS News with William Paley. But in the early 60s, they began dismantling the news division at CBS News with William Paley, because they decided to use those resources for shows like Gilligan's Island, literally, and Beverly Hillbillies and the Munsters, that were earning much more money than the news was. And he drank himself to his grave and chain smoked and drank alcoholic and died a very pessimistic, cynical, bitter man about, to hell with these people, the public, you know, they don't want to be educated, yada, yada, yada. So there have been some people that have died very pessimistic deaths. And then that's great that Tom Lovejoy died as an optimist. I'd be interested to know, for the 10 or 20 greatest of environmentalists, what their truthful state was and not what they were projecting the public. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to win this thing, but what they
I think that in the case of Tom Lovejoy, I think it was core to the way he operated.
Yeah.
You know, there are certainly people that put on a happy face when inside they're feeling terrible. There was an environmentalist actually who was very, I can't remember who the name of the person, but it ultimately wound up setting himself on fire. I mean, that's That's kind of your epitome.
That's a fairly clear statement of pessimism.
Yeah, I think we'll put that one in the pessimist column.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we know anything about?
I've been thinking about this whole thing about the planet as sort of, as you know, it's very easy to get discouraged. Now you can say, "Oh, electric cars are great," and then the Washington Post will run an article about all this incredible toxic mud that's washing onto the coral reefs of Indonesia, mining for cobalt or something.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like conservation is like running a house. I mean, you think you've done something and then something breaks. You have to keep washing the dishes. You can't just wash them once and then that's it. And if that's you just have to sort of kind of assimilate it as a kind of way of being. I don't know. I mean, that sounds very kind of.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I'll add a final little tidbit to go with that, which was the summer of 1980 when Hurricane Allen hit there. I spent that summer mostly living in Washington, D.C., and my girlfriend at the time was working on the Alaska lands legislation campaign that was gargantuan that summer. And they pulled together all the environmental groups, like this coalition of 20 some environmental groups. It was back long before all the commercial interests had corrupted the whole environmental community. But it was really a beautiful, heroic campaign that they waged. And at the end of the summer, they won the campaign in a big, big way. They locked up all of Alaska with all that legislation to this day that the Republicans are still trying to unlock. And we went to a speech, I think it was from Stuart Udall or Morris Udall, one of those Udall guys. And one of the things he said, it was a big celebration. And he said, don't celebrate too much, because for the rest of your lives, you're going to have to defend this stuff. You got a big victory here. You locked it up. But, as soon as we come back in session, they're going to be at it trying to undo all this stuff. And same thing you're saying, all of this stuff, nothing's permanent. It's just a daily maintenance type thing. Like you say, maintaining a house. That's a really good analogy for it at the simplest of levels of what environmentalism is like. There is no permanent solving of anything. It's a way of life. Interesting. That is a wonderful note to wrap this discussion up with. And before you get booted out of your library there that you are broadcasting to us
I've got
from
15 minutes.
You got still 15 minutes. All right, you can pack things up. But thank you very, very much. And looking forward to your next round of the course. Actually, you're going to be doing 3 rounds, whether you like it or not. We've got 3 rounds going right now. And so they'll all be coming around the same point. And you'll be getting 3 standing ovations, I guaranteed. Once again, and Matt will have to field all the questions. Can we get her slides? Will she share her slides? That's what you're the number one presentation that everybody asked for the slides for. So, yeehaw.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, stay warm up there. Stay cool down there. And I will stay chill where I am here in Southern California. And take care, everybody. See you on the next episode of the ABT Time podcast. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye. Thank you.